Welcome, everybody, to another exciting edition of US Law Live, the official podcast of the US Law Network. I am Michael Judy from the Dysart Taylor firm in Kansas City, Missouri, and we are excited to bring you part two of our exclusive podcast with Roger Yaffe, the CEO of the US Law Network. Hello, Roger. How are you?
I'm doing good, Mike. Grateful to be back on a second time. That must have meant that ratings went right through the roof off the first episode. So we'll see if we can continue that.
Yeah, and I will tell you that it had nothing to do with me, probably a little bit to do with you, but I would attribute the raise or the rise in our ratings to the two lovely co-hosts. We've got Pam Halford from the Carl Allison firm in Dothan, Alabama, and
Hey,
Jessica
everybody.
Dark from Pierce Couch in Oklahoma City. Hello, Pam. Hello, Jessica.
Hello, Mike. Hi, Roger.
Hey, Jessica.
Hello, hello.
Hey, Pam.
I think the one thing we can all take away is that our fourth esteemed co-host, Nick Roush, wasn't on episode one. He's not on episode two. Perhaps that is why the ratings are so high.
That could be another reason for it.
Just kidding. He's wonderful. Hopefully, Nick can join us for part three.
Yeah, yes, I agree. Well, Roger, we're happy to have you back. Before we were recording, we were talking. You actually get to spend a full week at home this week. What's that like?
It's just as busy as traveling, unfortunately, but it does get me the opportunity to catch up on a few things and try to stay married a little bit longer. So it's nice. As I mentioned to you beforehand, this is my last full week at home until mid-September. So I was also mentioning that I thought that as I was getting older, travel should be reducing, but it seems to be going the opposite direction. But that all means good things for U.S. law and that we're active and we've got a lot going on.
Yeah, well, picking up on that, we at the first podcast we talked about the early days of U.S. law, what led to its success, what went on in the early days, and for the next 30 or so minutes, we'll talk about the growth of U.S. law over the last 25 years, what went into that, your thoughts on the good, the bad, and the ugly on the growth of U.S. law, things that U.S. law did that were great, some things that it tried that may have not been the best ideas. Also, getting into some of the travel horror stories, as I'm sure you will attest to, and many of our listeners will know, there was always something with a bus. And then finally, getting into some behind the scenes information about what goes into planning events. The things that our members don't appreciate that the clients may not know about, but just even when you're at home for a week, what keeps you busy. So I assume you're ready to dazzle us on all of those topics.
I will try my best.
So we talked again last time we talked, the first several years of U.S. law and what went into creating it, et cetera. And I guess we can break it down, whatever you think makes sense. But are you able to, look back on 25 years and break it down into, all right, well, the first 5 years we did X and then 10 years this. I mean, in your mind, kind of what led to the growth and turned U.S. law from that meeting in Chicago to what it is today? And I know that's a very broad question, which makes it a good one.
Yeah, I'll try to answer it. When I think about the 25 years, I would probably say starting 2001 through probably 2005 or six, so probably 5 or so years. Really, the major emphasis with this organization was bringing in quality firms. It was, I don't love to say filling out the map because it seems like if you say filling out the map, that we were just taking firms that were of interest to the organization or that they were interested in U.S. law. There's a lot that goes behind bringing in new member firms. But I do think that was kind of that first 5 or 6 years. I don't have the exact number in front of me, but I would imagine if I look back, probably more than half of our membership, even today, came into U.S. law during those first 5 or 6 years. So that was really the focus. I think then as we transitioned and we started filling in the map, it was more than about a focus of the value that we can provide to the clients that are exposed to U.S. law, generating the return on investment for US Law member firms in terms of their, obviously, as a business development organization, and making sure that we were responding to the existing needs of the membership. So I think that's kind of how maybe that shifted after the first few years. And quite honestly, we continue to do both today. We still obviously look for new member firms in markets where there are needs, and we still continue to focus on how we're providing value back to our membership and the clients they serve.
And from obviously you talked about making sure that it's a return on investment, that we're doing the right thing to bring in, the right clients to make it not only valuable for the firms, but also for the clients who are coming, that they can bring something back to their respective organizations. Are there things that U.S. law has implemented now, or that we're doing today that just, think, boy, that's common sense. Can't believe we didn't think about we were to do this earlier on.
Yeah, I think one of the things has to do with as we grew our portfolio of client-facing events was to make sure that the clients that were invited and ultimately attended U.S. law events were those that obviously had an interest in the organization, had been likely exposed to U.S. law by one of the relationships that they probably already had existing with U.S. law member firms or attorneys. But one of the major changes that we had, and this really kind of popped in about 2010, was up until that point, we allowed firms to just invite whoever they wanted to invite to U.S. law events. And quite honestly, the firms themselves paid the expenses associated with those clients to attend those events. And as we kind of got further along with that, we realized that a lot of our really high quality firms had more clients and more introductions they could bring to the organization than we might otherwise be seeing because they were paying for, 4, 5, 6, 7 clients. So a big change we made back in 2010, which has gone through changes since then, but still I think has a common theme to it, is that all of those expenses associated with clients attending U.S. law events is pooled by the member firms. So one firm is really not paying more than another firm. We're equally sharing the cost, which also allows us to make sure that all of the clients, quality clients that maybe one or two firms were hesitant to bring early on because of the cost that would be attributed to them, we were getting access to those people. So that was something that was a fairly significant change that happened around 2010. Again, we've made changes to that system since then, but the common theme is that we want folks coming to our events that are interested in the organization, have a relationship with at least one member firm, and see the value of using more of the network as they obviously have legal needs that pop up.
Is there any consideration, Roger, given to client size or geographic reach when we're looking at the right person that we want to bring into a U.S. law event?
Sure. We're obviously primarily a national organization, competing with national law firms or international law firms. We do obviously have our relationships and memberships outside the United States, which has grown certainly since the early days. So, but we typically talk about bringing national clients. Now, what is a kind of a definition of a national client? My definition of a national client is a client that has business operations and covers at least half the country. And so that's kind of what we look at. However, we also focus on more regional clients because there could be a client that only does business in 8 or 9 southeastern states, ma'am, that could be a client that could be of value to a lot of our southeast-based law firms. So we try to juggle the two things. But certainly, companies that have business outside, for example, outside of maybe just one state, as obviously that state could likely be serviced just by the U.S. law firm that is in that state.
I know that as time has progressed, there have been some shifts in the way that we reach out to our clients or host events for our members and our clients. And I just wanted to hear a little bit about that because there have been some changes during my tenure at US Law, but I'm thinking of, client conferences. I'm thinking of, US Law Mobile. I'm thinking about some smaller events that we host, forums versus summits and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, just in terms of the growth of our events, um, for many years, you were looking at maybe 5 or 6 events on our calendar. It would be our 2 client conferences, spring and fall, our women's connection, um, maybe a couple events that we would host at other industry organizations. Transportation certainly has done that for a long time. And then maybe 1 or 2, and we've changed the names on them over time, exchanges or forums. We are hosting 26 events in 2026. So that keeps us busy, as you can imagine. But it allows us to more personalize, I think, the offerings to the clients. One of the things we made a decision on really, and again, was kind of started with transportation a little bit before COVID, and then we grew it after COVID, was more of a focus on what we would call smaller, more intimate sized events. Um, there are very few attorneys, there are very few clients that we talk to that don't say they prefer the smaller events over the large events. That doesn't mean we don't love our large event. We've got one coming up in Boston in September. It's our big showpiece for the year. It's the event where we can bring the most amount of people to. But where really the relationship building that takes place between the firms and between firms and clients takes place, it's the smaller events that easier to get around, just easier to manage and navigate. So that's that. One of the things, just thinking about a kind of a fun story, kind of referencing what you were mentioning before, in the early days, one of the reasons we made the change in terms of kind of centralizing invitations was because I still remember we had an event. It was, I think, one of our client conferences coming up. And this is when, again, the firms were inviting clients directly. And sometimes they would include US Law, copy us on an email, let us know they were inviting those clients directly. But the firm was actually responsible for all the logistics for the client, booking the hotel, booking the airfare, all of that. And our law firms are wonderful. You're great doing what you do. You're not great travel agents. And so we made a
Agreed.
decision that made the decision we would centralize that because we had a couple issues where we had a couple clients that got invited, said love to come, and a day before they were supposed to travel, hadn't heard anything further. So that was one of the changes we made.
And on, you mentioned, a couple of things talking about the, smaller, more intimate events, and then, clients that may not have a national reach, but maybe, a more regional reach. And I think it gets back to, and it's been a common theme through a lot of these podcasts of relationships that I can go to something and, even though we don't have offices, we're just in the Midwest, don't have anything in the Southeast, but if Pam, makes an effort to introduce me to somebody, I never know if that person's going to switch jobs or make a career move or whatever else. And if I've met that person at an event and they go from covering the Southeast to covering the Midwest, and I've met that person, developed that relationship, that's led to a business opportunity. So I mean, I think the way that US law has approached all that, that if you have the relationship first, everything else flows out of it.
Yeah, I mean, one of the dynamics that we always, and this goes back 25 years, that we hear about, and we hear about it from both the member attorneys as well as the clients, is that the environment that we create at US Law events is very different than I think a lot of other what we would call maybe more general industry specific association events. Obviously, the dynamic of the fact that you're in the room and your competitors are not in the room changes the dynamic significantly. But it goes further than that. It's not just the fact that you don't have to worry about your competitors in the room. The people that are in the room to help you and introduce you to their clients. And the culture we've created, I think, within US law, and again, I'll go back to the early days and really kind of appreciate the folks that were involved early on that created that culture to say this was going to be different and this was how it was going to be different. And so we obviously hear about it again from the member attorneys. It's always nice to hear about it when we have new member firms that join, and we're obviously talking to them a little bit about this culture. But until you have the opportunity to experience it, it's a little bit difficult to understand it. But I think if you talk to most all, if not all of our newer member firms, they'd say it's exactly how it was kind of presented to us. From the client side, obviously we want to make sure that they're incredibly comfortable. Because if they are, and they don't feel like they have the bullseye on their forehead or the blinking lights on their name badge that says client, 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 they're more likely to come back. And again, that's kind of part of the culture that we've established from the early days. The one thing that we always revert back to that was our founders made sure that we emphasized, and we still do today. No business cards. We don't want
Yeah.
business cards being passed around at US law events. And I still, every time we have an event, I will hear somebody or a client will say, "Oh gosh, I was surprised that I asked for a business card. They said they don't carry business cards," and it gives me the opportunity to explain why. So,
You know, I love that about US law that we don't do the business card thing. I think it is so special and unique, and I do really think it allows everybody to be a little bit more at ease. And it just feels so much more natural. But there is a problem with that, and that's that I have just stopped carrying business cards now. And like I got called out to a fatal accident yesterday, and I go straight from my beach condo that I have for the summer to this fatal accident. So I look like hot garbage. It's not good. I don't look profesh. And
You don't
then I
even have
roll
a
up.
business card to back it up.
Correct. So then I'm here with all these state troopers, and I just come bebopping up to the accident in my mom car and my kids. And I'm like, yeah, I don't have any business card. You just have to take my word for it or look me up online.
And Roger, I think what one question I have is around this culture and relationship is, most of our events, forums, the big conferences, we have activities, whether that's, based in the hotel or going out and seeing some of the sites of whatever city we may be visiting. Tell us about how has that, if it has, changed over the years? I mean, what's the feedback from clients or member attorneys? Obviously being in the meeting room with clients and attorneys is one thing, but then being out in, on a bus or at a restaurant, could bring a different kind of culture, I guess, environment. What do you see in terms of the activities?
yeah, that's something started the early days of US law. I like to say that I think we put on some of the best education in the legal industry. But what I know is we put on some of the greatest fun and social events in the legal industry. I know that for a fact. And so one of the things that was kind of stressed early on was we wanted to do things a little bit differently. So it wasn't just the golf outing, or it wasn't just the spa treatments. And so we really kind of were challenged early on to make sure that we were creating unique and creative experiences for our attendees, things that they couldn't necessarily do on their own when they were going to a market. Even today, where we're putting on these activities, and for example, at a client conference, both afternoons, I think we have 9 or 10 different activities. So people going in so many different directions. And every one of those, we try to provide some sort of unique aspect to it that otherwise, again, makes it memorable or something that people are getting that they otherwise wouldn't get. And so it's always been a big part of it. Every event we host them, and we host those social events. And we want both the members and clients to walk away and say, that was the greatest thing I've ever attended. And so, still 25 years later, it's always a little bit of a challenge. I'm not a guy that likes to do things over, do it twice. So after 25 years, there's not a lot that we haven't done. So we still try to stay creative with it, but it is something I think that differentiates us.
And on that note, Roger, you're dovetailing nicely into the next topic of, what goes on in planning an event, because I know you and your team do such a great job with all of these events. I mean, every detail is paid attention to. And, with the afternoon activities, if something gets canceled, it's raining, there's something else, boom, there's a backup. Or if somebody can't go to this activity and they want to go to another, no problem, it's switched. Touch a little bit on when do you start planning for these events? For the conference coming up in Boston, when does that planning begin in earnest, and what goes into getting these things up off the ground?
Well, as you can imagine, running 25 plus events a year, it isn't just a matter of kind of slapping it together the last couple of weeks before an event. We typically book our larger events, which in our case would be our annual member meeting, client conference, women's connection. We'd like to stay 18 to 24 months out. It doesn't always work that way. Um, but especially since they're larger, you want to get them on the books earlier. It just becomes more difficult to find properties sometimes if you wait too long. With our smaller events now, we are all booked, for example, for everything for 2027, and I'm actually starting to think about 2028 events. So, what goes on behind the scenes? We have a small team, but they're they're all professionals and they know exactly what to do, and they all work really well together. Um, there's always things that happen. There's things that happen before you get there. There's things that happen when you get there. And uh, when I got involved in event planning well before US law, one of the first things that was taught to me is it doesn't matter if it's something's going wrong. Just make sure the attendees don't know it's going wrong, and you just fix it. And as long as they kind of see a seamless process, that's really what matters. So, but you have to be able to juggle things and adjust, and there's a lot of variables that are outside of your control.
And when you with the events that are associated with, or sorry, the activities that are associated with the events, how do those get planned? Is that something that you and your team are coming up with? Is it something? Does the venue suggest contacts they have? What goes into picking all of that stuff? Because again, they are wonderful activities that are associated with those events.
We love our hotel partners, but if I relied on our hotel partners to give us creative ideas for events, we would have been in big trouble many years ago. Um, there, look, having done this for as long as we've done this for, first of all, there's not a lot of markets that we haven't been to. So we have a pretty good idea when we're selecting a market, kind of what we've done in the past and who the relationships are and the vendors that we've used. But certainly, if we're going to a market that we haven't been to, the beauty of our world right now is all you need is a laptop and now I guess ChatGPT or Claude or before that Google search, and you can pretty much identify the different options that are out there. Sometimes we'll use vendors that will help kind of steer us into certain directions, but most of the time, it's just kind of research and again relationships that we already have. To give you an idea, the upcoming Boston conference, where we'll have somewhere between 500 to 550 people for basically 3 full days, um, we will hire in the neighborhood of 50 to 60 different vendors to put on that event. That's venues, that's activities, that's caterers, that's audiovisual, that's signage and decor, rentals, theming. Um, I could go on and on. So it's a fairly significant production. And again, all that matters is that nobody notices the chaos behind the scenes.
And and you probably can't give what's a typical day at a conference, but to the extent you can share, what is the chaos that goes behind the scenes?
Well, it used to be for me that I would always have to be the first one up and the last one to go to sleep. But as I've gotten older, I don't do that anymore. So again, thank God for the team that we have. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty early starts because we need to be down there before attendees start showing up. And the one thing everybody knows about U.S. law, we're prompt. We don't let people sleep in, as we like to say, sleep on the flight home. And so it really starts early and ends late because we're also a social crowd, and some of the best connections are made in those late night bar sessions, as we call them. So, it's just, again, we all have responsibilities. The bigger the event, the more people we have on property to do it. And all matters about kind of all the prep that you put in beforehand, because once you get on site, things tend to get a little bit out of your control, and you're just managing the issues that are immediately popping up in front of you.
I know whenever I tell people I'm going on a trip or post my pictures after the conference, people are like, wow, your job is so cool. And you're so lucky to get to do all these work trips. And I say, you guys, I am getting up hours earlier than I do at home, and I am going to bed several hours later than when I'm at home. So it is exhausting. And I can't even imagine for you guys because y'all are doing way more actual work when you're there. So we appreciate you and we see you and we always see all your team front and center. And I'm always glad to have them because inevitably something goes wrong and they're there to take care of it.
That's it. You gotta manage it. Good example. Last week we hosted our medical law forum followed by our professional liability forum. So we actually hosted two separate events, two totally different audiences at the same location in Asheville. The first event was Monday to Wednesday. The second event started later Wednesday, finished up on Friday. I never left the property until I left to go to the airport to leave. So it's not like we're all going out and having a good time either. It's when we're on site, it's about work. And yeah, no, those are we get the same thing. Oh, you're going to such nice places. Yes, we are. And typically we're going to places in markets where we have nice weather when we're there. But I'm not sitting by the pool if that's what you're thinking that I'm doing. So
That's not what I'm
Yeah.
thinking or Jessica's thinking. That's what Pam thinks.
and so far in 25 years, I don't think I've ever had to run into anybody in the waiting room at the spa waiting for my treatment. So I've managed to be able to schedule my spa treatments around the US law schedule so that I'm never caught there.
I always joke that I pick the least active activity and try to get on the spa schedule as soon as I can.
A few years ago, Brad Wright and I were both in the spa, not at US Law time. We were either there late or before the conference got started. So we both went to the spa and our treatments were scheduled at the same time. So we were chit-chatting, when we were in the lounge or whatever. And so they came to get us, our service providers came to get us, and they go to try to take us back to a couples massage. And we were both like,
No, 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 no.
oh, things happen.
Yes, I've managed to avoid that, and I've never been in a spa at the same time that Brad has, which is more about me not having many spa treatments because we all know about Brad and how much he loves
Lives there.
a great spa.
Well, I know one thing, Roger, that is out of your control at a lot of these events is transportation needs. And I know there's a running joke of if you haven't, been on a bus that's broken down or had some sort of travel issue at a U.S. law event, then you really haven't lived a U.S. law event. But over the 25 years, I guess what are a handful or as many as you care to share, bus stories, travel delays, things that, jump into your head of, man, I can't believe that happened, yet we survived it.
Well, I'm thinking about one of our long-standing clients and great friends of U.S. Law, Tom DiMatteo of ABC Bus Company. We've never had a bus issue with any buses that have kind of originated through ABC Bus. So, Tom, shout out to you on that. Um, yeah, we call them buscapades because it's just gotten so bad over many years. And there's two things we can't control. We can't control weather and we can't control buses. And trust me, I've tried with both. Yeah, with buses, it's just I've said that when I retire someday, this will be a best-selling novel or book that I will write about all the U.S. law stories, but certainly buses will take up multiple chapters in that book. We've had everything from it started with an initial bus ride to a ranch in Austin, Texas in 2006. We had multiple buses, and for some reason, they all got back to the hotel fine, but there was one that kind of showed up an hour and a half later, I should say, than everybody else arrived back. So still don't know where exactly they got lost, but they were driving around somewhere in outside of Austin, Texas. We've had buses that have lost their power steering. You ever tried to drive a
Oh,
bus without power steering? That actually happened with one of our board of directors retreat. And I remember a few of our board members, we didn't stop. A few board members got up and helped the bus driver turn the steering wheel. And fortunately, we only had two more turns to get back to the hotel. And we got back somehow, even without the power steering. We had a bus for a golf event. Actually, speaking of Brad, it was he hosted us up in the Akron Canton area. We had an event up at Firestone Country Club, a golf event, and for some reason, the bus driver decided to drive the bus under the porte-cochere outside of the clubhouse, and obviously misjudged the height availability. And so drove the bus, and we're like, people in the back were like, stop, stop, stop. He kept going, and all of a sudden, you heard the scraping of the top of the bus against the porte-cochere. And he realized, oops, I made a mistake. And our folks didn't care. They just got off. We got our golf clubs. We are going to go play golf. Well, that was a problem because when everybody got off the bus, the weight of everybody getting off the bus didn't help the driver get back out under. So we all had to get back on the bus with the weight so he could back up and get out. I don't even want to know the damage that he did. Obviously, a very famous bus story we had. It was 2000, I believe, 17 in Atlanta. I know you guys have had calls and podcasts talking about what was originally created as the Future U.S. Law Leaders Group. And we had a first meeting of that group in Atlanta prior to a client conference that we were doing up on the north side of Atlanta. And with that first group, we had most of our board members participate in that meeting. And then when the meeting was done, we had a social event that we're driving them up north. And unfortunately, the bus broke down on the side of I-85. It completely broke down. And we were fortunate that there was a second bus that was able to get us, but it took easily an hour and a half to pick us up on the side of I-85. And that was most of our board of directors. So was not feeling really comfortable on the side of the expressway in Atlanta while that was going on. So many more than that. And again, everybody will have to wait for the book that I'll write when I someday retire.
you have a title for the book yet?
Well, it's going to be called Buscapades.
Buscapades. All right.
And so it'll, the life and story of U.S. Law Network bus ride, something. We'll come up with something better than that.
That's what ChatGPT is for, Roger.
That's right.
No original thoughts anymore.
I've become a Claude guy. I don't know about you guys. I started using Claude and it's amazing. So
Well, I've talked on this podcast many times, so everyone knows, but I'm very much in love with my boyfriend named Harvey. And we interact multiple times a day. Don't be jealous.
yeah. I don't know which one's better, Claude or Harvey. Obviously a little bit different, but
Well, Roger, we, as always, appreciate your time, your willingness to share your thoughts on U.S. law, give us some inside information about what goes on within the organization. Again, always appreciate everything that you and your team does. I know it is no easy task putting everything together. And as we've talked about, Anytime something goes wrong, very few people know that something has gone wrong because the response is usually, we'll handle it. Not a big deal. It's like you've already prepared and planned for the contingency. So thank you to you and your team. And thank you all for listening for part 2 of our 3-part series with Roger Yaffe.
We're going to do one more. We're going to do one more of these.
We've got one more of these. We're going to talk about
Cool.
U.S. law future and, maybe some fun trivia about Roger and the network and things of that nature. So stay tuned for our next one. But we appreciate your time, Roger.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you all for tuning in to another edition of U.S. Law Live, the official podcast of the U.S. Law Network.